It's funny. I mentioned when I was a kid, I was like dead set on doing design and like art and like that being a thing. And I almost like gave up on it completely in art school in high school because we were like doing a still life of a like fruit drawing. And my apple was bad. It was fine. It just wasn't like, I looked over and two of my classmates had better apples than me. And I'm like, well, if I can't compete in my class, I'm never going to make it. And luckily my teacher at the time was like, there's way more to this than being able to copy something. That's something that you can practice and learn. And she's like, your work has a sense of humor and like has all this stuff going on, and you should definitely not give up on this. And
hello, my name is Mr. Tom Froese, and these are my thoughts on illustration. This is a bi-weekly podcast about showing up and growing up as an illustrator. Welcome to episode 35. So in today's episode, I chat with fellow illustrator and top teacher Chris Piascik. We have a free-ranging, loosey-goosey conversation about all kinds of things, including whether you need to go to art school to become an illustrator, why Chris and I feel like we don't quite fit into the traditional illustrator mold. We talk about whether the ability to draw realistically is necessary for illustrators today. And we commiserate about angry dudes leaving nasty comments in our videos or on our videos. And we start off actually with an unexpectedly long conversation about vector files, which, yeah, it's unexpected. But as far as this subject goes, I think it was somewhat interesting, but I'll leave timestamps in the description so you can skip to a section that interests you more if that's not your cup of tea. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice that it's an actual video today. Hi, I'm doing this for the algorithm because the audio version of this podcast just doesn't really get picked up. And since Chris and I talked over video call and that's the recording, I have the video, so I'm going to use it. Anyway, we're going to get right into the conversation, but first I just want to thank you so much for watching and listening. I just want to shout out to my supporters on Patreon who make this podcast financially possible. If you like this podcast and you want to support what I'm doing, please do one of these three things. The first two are super easy. The first is just sharing it with your friends on social media. The second is just liking and subscribing to this podcast, liking this episode, wherever you happen to be listening or watching from. And the third is to become a drawing buddy on Patreon for $8. This gives you access to my monthly Draw With Me meetups, where we meet on a video call and draw together for an hour. You can learn more and sign up at patreon.com/TomFroese. So I just have one announcement. I will be taking a break from the podcast for the summer. I will be taking July and August off, and this will just help me kind of recharge the batteries and come back in September ready to go and ready to make more great content, more episodes for you on the Thoughts on Illustration podcast. I will still be doing the Draw With Me meetups for my drawing buddies on Patreon, and hopefully I'll be able to also throw in there some patrons only content for everybody throughout the summer, but I'll definitely be doing the Draw With Me's. Anyway, that's it. Let me introduce my guest for today. Chris Piascik is an illustrator with a very impressive client list that includes Nike, New Balance, McDonald's, Cartoon Network, The Washington Post, Google, and many, many more. He started his illustration career with a daily drawing project that continues to this day. So Chris started doing his daily drawing project 14 years ago, and he's still doing it. So Chris's work is very colorful, busy, and I'd say busy in a good way. It's very typographic and monstery and stickery and Nickelodeon-y, Ren and Stimpy, SpongeBob-y, and bursting with Chris's quirky personality. Chris has an amazing YouTube channel where he's showing himself to be quite the Adobe Fresco aficionado, and he posts videos twice weekly there, including a live streamed drawing event thing every single Friday. So every Friday, Chris does a live stream. Free for you, free for anyone on YouTube. It's really fun. Please go check that out. But first, I'm excited to share our conversation today. I hope you enjoy it. It's a hard life.
yeah.
Yeah. How's the iPad with the matte screen going?
I love it. It's
Yeah.
you know, it's subtle, but it's like enough that I can draw on it, and I love not having to deal with a screen protector. It's a big difference for me. Like, it's very smooth, but like I can't draw on a regular iPad screen. And
Yeah, you made a point about that.
yeah, I can't do it at all.
I watched your I think you had even like a unboxing and then a proper review after, like follow-up thoughts. So I watched those.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me how popular those kinds of videos are. Like, you know, I was looking through some of your stuff on your channel just to get a sense of what to talk about. And your most popular videos are like screen protectors or like screen protector adjacent, or then there's the like Procreate versus Fresco. Those seem to be like the hot things. But it's just crazy how important screen protectors are for people. And maybe I'm hyper tuned into that because I've done reviews for Pen Tips and for AstroPad, and so my antenna are already up about that. But it never occurred to me that screen protectors were important. Like, I've existed with my iPad since, I'm going to say 2017. And until like the fall, I'd never touched a screen protector before.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was using them before. It sounds like I'm saying before it was cool, but like what I mean is before there was an industry geared towards them being for drawing. So I used to use a matte screen protector on my iPhone because I hated the feel of the glass. I don't do it anymore. I don't know why I don't, because I loved it. And then when I got an iPad, I bought one to see if it would work. And then I was like, oh my God, this feels like paper. So then I just used those forever. And then all of a, like a couple of years later, it became like an industry. But I think there's two things to that. I don't think it's necessarily just the iPadness or the screen protectorness of those videos, because if you notice, like there's the Fresco and Procreate ones are huge. I think it's people have very strong opinions. And if you notice in like the comments on the iPad one, there's so many angry comments. And it's the same on the Procreate Fresco videos where people are just furious. And I think that draws, you know, that engagement pushes the algorithm.
What are they furious about?
For which? The Procreate or the iPad?
The iPad ones.
So the iPad one, there's a lot of people who are saying that I'm an idiot because it's not for drawing. It's just to not reflect light.
I'm laughing, but I'm also very sorry.
Oh no, it's fine. It's kind of funny. Other time, it's like lots of people furious about Apple charging, like only putting it on the 1 and 2 terabyte ones. People saying that people are sure that the screen is going to be ruined immediately and that you can't use the pencil on it. There's just lots of angry thoughts around. All of it.
And do you take that personally?
I'm okay to most of the time. It depends on like my mood. It usually doesn't bother me. I've developed a little bit of a thick skin in this regard because, you know, I did so much political illustrations, like anti-Trump stuff for so long. And those people come in hot in the comments. So I've been dealing with it for as long as I've been doing daily drawings. Like I started them in 2007, right at the beginning of that presidential election with Obama. And I was like doing drawings all about that. And that was, you know, it seems mild now, but that was, you know, people were very angry then.
That goes way back.
Yeah, so it's like my whole career has been people getting mad at me about my opinions.
Do you ever hit back? Do you ever?
Oh yeah, too much.
Yeah.
And I try to be like I'm usually not just like a jerk about it, but like I respond to too many comments.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is very much like this along the lines of what you are saying, where like you really get a sense of what's important to people when it becomes spicy in the comments. And I released a video on my channel that was a little bit off brand. It's called The Best Way to Vectorize Your Detailed Photoshop Art. And there's like a picture of image trace and the Adobe Illustrator logo with a big X over it. And I made that video because I actually had to make a t-shirt, and it was very detailed, but I needed to vectorize it and image trace wouldn't work. And then I figured out this way to do it in Photoshop that worked very magically. And so I was like, I've been meaning to launch this video for months. And so I finally did it. And now this is my most viral video on my channel. And it's in 2 weeks, it's gotten 53,000 views.
Wow.
And hundreds of comments. And my subscribership has gone up a lot. So it's just this one video. And the comments are, most of them, to be honest, to be very fair, are very positive. People are like, oh my gosh, why didn't I know about this 20 years ago? And that's exactly why I thought it was an important thing to post. But people are getting so opinionated, or they're almost like mad because I didn't show certain proofs that it actually works. Like, oh yeah, it's all digital. Like, I can't remember his precise comments, but yeah, people are like just getting mad or being mean, or telling me that there's one guy who critiqued. These are the comments I remember. One guy critiqued me because my video was over 9 minutes long, and he said that
I get that so much.
I should pay attention to Disney's model of, I don't know, he's talked about Disney and how they figured out how to make a cartoon under 9 minutes. And I'm like, this is an entertainment. And and another person's like, okay, you know the timestampers, the people who come in and say the tip starts at 3 minutes or whatever. And you're like, but there's context. And I'm just warming up here. And you can skip. It's fine. Thanks for posting. At the end of the day, sure. Thanks for timestamping. But there is a little bit of a passive aggressive, like, let's move on with it. And I'm very hypersensitive to that because I am a bit of a rambler and a slow thinker. So anyway, it's very off brand for me online, but I started like punching back. Like defending myself sometimes and saying it works, and I like my tips are actually work. I can show you my shirt. I can take a picture of it and send it to you. I can prove it. It's like it's never going to be good enough. Yeah, but there is something so satisfying about getting actual comments and engagement on a post. There's nothing more unsatisfying, to be honest, than posting something on YouTube. You spend most of your week editing it, and then you get very little engagement. You're like, did this matter? Oh yeah. Like that one video that I like worked really hard on and I thought was a good one, and I liked the video, was a recent one where I like redid a bunch of the X-Men characters as SpongeBob characters, and like it is just my worst performing video I've ever made. I thought it was going to be a good one, and I liked it. I had fun. I thought the edit was good. And like, I did one before that where I did Wolverine as like a Ren and Stimpy character, and that one was trash. And then I was like, oh, maybe it's just because it was only one character. So in the SpongeBob one, I did like a whole bunch of them, and I did it quickly and like more fast paced and just trash. And how far into your YouTubing career was that? Was that early on?
They're recent videos.
They're recent. And so you feel like at this point you have a handle on what works?
No.
But you don't?
No, I don't, because that one I thought was going to work. Both of those I thought would be good videos, especially too because I was like, oh yeah, I'm like tying into the trend of like, this new X-Men series coming out and people talking about that a lot and it being like a trending topic. Nope. Not at all. Yeah. Okay. This is a YouTube nerd question, but how long do you spend on your thumbnails? On my thumbnails? So sometimes the thing is, sometimes I'll like change them quickly. Like I've changed those, like the ones for those 2 videos, like 7 times trying to save the video.
Yeah.
But I think it's like with any of my work, like sometimes it's quick and sometimes it takes forever for no reason. I feel like it's hard for me to gauge because sometimes like it just like comes together perfectly, and other times you're like noodling with it forever. I don't know if that's the case for you, but I know some projects are so fast for me and some are not.
Yeah, some things come together, but almost every time I get stuck on the thumbnail. I don't do the thing where you make the thumbnail first and then make the video.
Yeah, I don't either, even though I tell myself to every time.
I understand the logic behind that. It's basically like the thumbnail should summarize the idea and prove that it's good. But yeah, I'll go through like 10, sometimes 20 iterations of the composition, or, you know, do I do the like my face with the surprise face, you know, all those tropes that you find in videos. I'm a bit of a, what's the word? I have a rebellious spirit about doing things that are the way people do things. I don't want to do the faces on YouTube videos, but I end up doing them more often than I'd like. It just seems to be what works, what people expect, and it gives that personality. It's like you in the video. But interestingly enough, with that video that I did with the image trace, I did spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make that as pithy, and like you're scanning through, you see a big X over image trace and it says the best way to vectorize your artwork. So I was like, that works. But it took me a while to get there. But what's interesting about that is that it was very anti-design and there's no picture or anything like that. So I don't know what the science is behind thumbnails.
I'm looking at my YouTube studio, and like all but one of my top 5 videos do not have my face in them.
Okay.
And actually 3 out of 5 are Procreate and Fresco videos.
You know, that's right. Your top videos, just sorting by popularity.
Yeah.
I have your page up here too.
It's funny you're talking about the vector art thing, because that's my 4th one.
I just wrote, I'm about to publish it, a Substack article about vector, like why you don't need to actually send in vectors.
Oh my God.
Often good. You're required. And I'm like, why am I writing this? I've gone through 3 drafts, and I have more time than I want to admit, but why am I writing about vectors? I think it's partly because I'm like, oh, okay, people care about this stuff based on this one video that went kind of viral for my channel. And it's such like, I never wanted to get into that space of teaching technical things. I really consider myself more about teaching principles and strategy and stuff. But I actually, you know, working over 20 years as a graphic designer and illustrator, I also have a lot of technical know-how, and a lot of people want that. So it's probably what people want. But where was I going with this? I guess I was inspired by that success on my video to go further with it. But I also had to do a t-shirt recently and send it to a printer. And I work in Photoshop, and I make pristine color separations, and I work in all the technical stuff. I got it all dialed in. I do a lot of print stuff in like separations-based print work, like letterpress. And the printers, like the press operators, will say, no, you need to send it in vectors. I'm like, I don't need to send you vectors. Like silkscreen existed before Illustrator. Your computer can handle an image, like a raster image. So anyway, I don't know why.
No, I totally get it. People are obsessed with the idea of vector. I feel like I spend way too much time answering questions about this, or like people feeling like their work has to be vector, or like, why aren't you doing this in vector? And it's like, you almost never need it to be vector. It's funny, we were talking about like exchanges with people. Like someone was being very rude in like arguing with other people on my video, in a recent video about vector stuff, and they were like, well, Fresco's lying about having vector because I did an animation using all the vector brushes, and then when I export my video and I zoom in, it's pixelated. And I'm like, because a video file is not vector. Doesn't matter how you made it. And like, they were just like, well, you're not understanding what I'm saying, and you think you know more than me. And I'm like, I'm trying to be polite. Like, your video file is not a vector file anymore. Like, you may have made it with vector, but now it is he was calling it a 1440p video, and I'm like, literally, you're calling it a pixel thing, so there's no vector involved.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. The things people get upset about. What about you had a video about resolution and like how was that based on those kinds of exchanges?
Yeah, I just feel like there's so many repetitive questions about like people just not having an understanding of any of it, or like just the constantly like, or seeing people just saying, yeah, you just need to work at 300 DPI and just that. And like, I made that in like thinking it would just be a throwaway video that I could just link to instead of explaining it over and over again, but it ended up being a popular one. But it's just like, people don't, like they'll be like, oh, well, I'm working at, 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels at 300 DPI. And I'm like, that doesn't mean anything because it's, pixels per inch or dots per inch. Like, if your file is only 1000 pixels, it doesn't matter what DPI it is. So yeah, that's why I made that video.
Exactly. Yeah, I had another heated exchange. Just goes back like a few years. I was on Twitter and I said something like, you can work in RGB. You don't have to work in CMYK. And
that's
then
another thing.
People are just getting so mad. I find there's a certain kind of person, usually a dude, and either they're kind of old school.
Always a dude.
Always a dude. Sorry, guys. But yeah, they I feel like maybe they're creatively unfulfilled. Like they're not in so much a creative space as they are in the more tech production side of things. And so that's what they see a lot. And to be fair, I imagine that if they're dealing with, messy illustrators work and they have to clean it up pre-production or for pre-press, they probably got a lot of crap. They probably have to like sort out a lot of people's crap that they didn't know how to do. And so they know stuff, but it gets very disproportionate once it starts to make it to Twitter or the comments or that kind of thing. Yeah.
People just have like they're just like constantly like, well, how am I supposed to get something? How am I supposed to print something? They think like on their printer at home, they can't, like, printers that you buy for your home are meant to work with RGB. Like they're meant to emulate the screen. They're not a printing press. Like the only time you have to think about CMYK is if it's being printed on like a 4-color press.
That's right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that's just kind of held over from the olden days.
Yeah,
that people still believe, including the requirement for vectors. I'll spoil my article, but the reason people like vectors are usually required is because the press operators just won't take them. Like there's no actual hardware or software reason why they can't take them. It's just that they won't, or they can't. They like actually don't. Yeah. They're not familiar with that method, and so they just won't do it. They won't take it.
Like the only time you need something to be vector is like if you're working on branding, or if it's something that I feel like it's really just like branding, or I was gonna say things that like specifically need to be in vector for production reasons, but like some sort of engraving. But even then, it's probably.
No, there are certainly like times like if I don't know what the technical terms are, but if it's like engraving or laser cutting or CNC or those kinds of computer aided.
But even so, most of that software will like rip a TIFF or something. or whatever.
Like
but,
if you want to follow a path perfectly, if you imagine you're like routing something with a laser cutter or router, I'm sure a path helps more than something that has a little bit of artifacts like little pixels or something. I get that. But yeah, I had something, I lost it. Oh, maybe remember it later. But this is what it was. There's another reason why, unless it's branding assets, you shouldn't submit a vector, is because that's your intellectual property. And it's like, people, let's just say you're an illustrator and the client paid for a certain usage. They paid for like print and online for their website or something like that. But you've given them the vectors, and they could turn that beautiful illustration into a giant mural in their headquarters wall, but they didn't pay for that usage, or they could use it for any other thing. Because they have the vector file, they could just go ahead and do that. Whereas if they had the raster file sized at exactly the size that they paid for, they'd need to come back to you to actually expand the usage in whatever way. And so it's one way of just controlling your art. So that's actually a reason why, like, even if you work in vector, I don't think that you need to give your client a vector file. It's not necessary. I mean, the only
time it's ever needed is if I'm working on branding stuff.
Exactly.
And, that's a very small part of what I do these days. And even sometimes they'll ask, like, I was recently doing an editorial assignment for like highlights, and the person was like, oh, can you send over the vector file? And I'm like, oh, actually it worked in Photoshop. They're like, oh yeah, that's fine. Just make sure it's layered. It's like, okay, cool.
Exactly. People are just used to asking for the vector. Now, do you think that I never thought that we'd talk so much about vectors, but here we are.
Either.
Do you think that you're kind of in this conversation a lot because Fresco has vector-based brushes, and you're kind of like confronted with that technical element?
Yeah, I mean, probably because I've done some videos on vector art in Fresco, and I've talked about it in that regard. Sometimes people think my work is vector if it's stuff like, sometimes I do stuff that doesn't have any texture or anything to it. And the fact that, Fresco does do vector, but the fact that it does both is also, like, I love it because it's useful for my work, but so many people do not understand, and they're like thinking that they're mad that their pixel brushes aren't now vector. And they just, like, they don't understand what vector is. They just want their artwork to be vector. They're like, why can't I use this as vector?
Yeah, it's just kind of a synonymous, or it's become what they perceive as like the superior file format, the highest quality, or something like that. I will shift gears from the vector conversation. I'm sure we can come back to this if we run out of other things to talk about. But I find it interesting, but I don't want to lose too many people.
I wasn't expecting this technical discussion, but hey.
I love it, and I'm actually curious to know, like, if people, I have a feeling that some people actually like need to know some of these things and they haven't, which is why we're talking about it anyway. So
yeah,
I was curious about your background, because obviously I haven't really properly introduced you. I'll introduce you in the beginning that I'll add on in post, but I am curious about your past. You say that, like, your bio says that you started as a graphic design at award-winning studios in the Northeast. And so I'm curious, which studios did you work for?
Sure. So the first studio I worked at was in New Haven, Connecticut, and it was called Group C. Did a lot of like corporate branding stuff there, like New Alliance, Yale Medical Group, and not very interesting stuff. And then I still had like my student portfolio online, and this studio in Boston, Alphabet Arm, saw my work, and they were looking to hire someone, and they asked me to come up to do an interview. and this was like the idea of what my dream job would have been. Like I got into I pursued graphic design because when I was a kid, I was really into like the album packaging that was around the house and like redrawing that stuff. And someone mentioned to me that that was a job, and it just blew my mind. So like from there on out, I was just like dead focused on becoming a graphic designer. And Alphabet Arm did a lot of music industry stuff. So when I like went on their website and saw, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I dreamed of. So when they offered me the job, even though it was like a little bit less pay and I had to move, I was just like, absolutely yes. So I moved it to Boston and worked there at Alphabet Arm, and, you know, got to do a lot of music industry stuff and a lot of other branding. And it felt like my dream job. It was a small studio. There was only like 5 to 6 of us. You know, it changed a little bit over the years. And I probably would have stayed there like forever. If like the economy didn't crash and like it sort of imploded and I had to go off on my own and like the daily drawing thing. Like illustration was never even on my radar. Like it didn't seem like something that was either a possibility for me or something that I was interested in, because I didn't really get what it was. Like the cool stuff I saw on like posters and album artwork and like t-shirts, I thought was just all graphic design.
Yeah. Where were you educated?
I went to the Hartford Art School in Connecticut in the U.S.
Okay. Is that like a well-known art program out there?
Yeah, it was, I'm trying to be mindful here. It was a little bit more well-known in the past. I feel like it has suffered a little bit over the years. You know, it's still a good school, but you know, I was very proud of it at the time. And like, you know, they were always getting like awards for design shows and, you know, illustration things. It's still a good school, yes, but
right, yeah. So you went for design, graphic design.
I did.
And to you, there's no difference between illustration and design. It was all the same thing. I think that was very much like a product of. I'm learning this all right now, actually, as I'm about to teach, or I'm putting together a class for conceptual editorial illustration. So I'm reading on the history of editorial illustration and tracing through that. And one of the movements through the 70s and 80s was Pushpin Studio and other
Big
studios.
influence.
And they called this, I think they called it like the studio model or something like that. Basically, it used to be like you had the illustration department and then you had the like art directors, and they were kind of separated by literally and physically in different sections of a building, and they weren't the same thing. And then with the studio model, like Pushpin, like there was just like a seamless, borderless goop of design and illustration. It was all the same thing. And you probably came up in that understanding, as did I. I went to NASCAD, and even though I was in the graphic design program, the people that became kind of my mentors, some of the teachers that I respected the most and ended up doing some internships with, I was just designing. Illustration was just part of that tool set. And it wasn't until I actually started, like, I promise this is going to come back to you, but it wasn't until I got kind of fed up in the design world, and I realized, like, oh, illustration is like, I think what I need to do, because it's more personal and autographic, and you can, like, you have a lot more autonomy in your work. So it was then that I started being like, comparing myself to other illustrators. I'm like, oh, they went to Sheridan, or they went to, you know, whatever illustration program. They're actually illustrators, and they know all that stuff. And so I feel like we came in through the back door of illustration, which is design, or maybe it's the front door. That's actually something I'm curious about. You say that you accidentally became an illustrator, but do you think there was any other way for you to have gotten there? Like, could you have skipped the design step and gotten into illustration had you known it existed?
Well, I'm very happy I did it the way that I did. I think graphic design is a very like critical skill. It makes your illustration better, but it's also super important when you are like an independent illustrator. Like, you know, bad design can ruin illustration very easily. Like you can make your stuff look terrible. I wanted to say that during school, I felt like that separation of illustration and design was even greater, because the illustration department at Harvard Art School is very, very separated from design and the rest of the art school altogether. It's a very old school. I actually signed up for one illustration class and then dropped it within a week because I was like, I don't want to do this. It's just very, very traditional. Very, like, they still to this day like barely touch anything digital. Like they frown on it. It's like is very, very separate. So you know, that illustration department is, although there's been good students, and I'm not saying anything bad about it, it has nothing to do with the kind of work that I do. And I don't think that I would be where I am if I did it differently. I would choose design 100% of the time, especially for the kind of work that I do, you know, the kind of work that you do too, where it's like not all about rendering the most realistic portrait, or, you know, like it's more concept and like, you know, graphic.
No, I mean, that experience that you say of the illustration being kind of like this very distinct thing from your design program, I guess, first of all, I guess you were aware of that in art school much more than I was. So I think our experiences were probably a lot different in that sense. There was an illustration program at my school, but it was so other that I didn't think of it as really a design thing at all.
Yeah,
like
that's what I mean. It felt like totally different from what I was doing, like had no relation.
Yeah, but it didn't even register as a thing that I would even be remotely interested in, because it was like academic art, painting derived, sort of that world. Even though I have a lot of respect for those skills, and I did life drawing all the time in school, and I took painting classes. Like those for me were just like, you know, I'm a creative, I'm artistic, I should have at least an understanding of these skills. But for me, illustrators were like people who liked comics and fantasy and stuff that I've never really been drawn to. I'm not pooping on those things. I'm just saying, like, they're just never, like, I love that. And I thought I was more of a designer. I thought I was more of like the organized, clean cut, you know, the design stereotype. That's kind of what I identified with more, you know, getting things in order and making sure fonts were like the right thing and all that kind of stuff. Totally. And now I'm just like, yeah, those things don't really.
Yeah, I mean, I've been
wet my whistle as much.
I've been just an illustrator for over 15 years now, and if you like dropped me into the art school and there was like the design department and the illustration department, I would feel much more at home in the design department from my school. There's other great illustration departments, but I haven't experienced them. But still to this day, the kind of stuff that they're doing there feels way far removed from what I do and what I like about illustration.
Yeah, I think people like us kind of exist in this sort of in-between world. When I was at Icon in, Kansas City, but more when I went to the one in Detroit in 2018. It was at the Creative Center. I think it's called the Creative Center for the Arts. Is that right?
I think so.
Or College for Creative Studies. That's it.
Oh, whoops.
And I was just very different, but there was something in there. Just walking through the halls and seeing the student work, I'm like, holy crap! Like, I am not an illustrator. Like in the way these people are learning to be illustrators. It is a different game. The level of skill that they have to learn painting, and they spend a lot of time doing anatomy. And so I actually like felt intimidated, kind of imposter syndrome, and just I gained a lot of respect for the proper illustrator, if you will. But it is also okay to not be that.
I think there's like a lot of reasons that it's great to not be that way, because sure, it's an amazing skill and I recognize that, but like that is not the most important part of illustration. Illustration is not just about it's like communicating an idea, and oftentimes using something that is super hyper realistic is not very good at communicating something specific, because when everything is like rendered so properly, it's like you can't really have that emphasis or like focus or detail not detail or like visual hierarchy. Just like you can't communicate as easily with something that is photorealistic. And on top of that too, like that also feels like the thing that's most at risk with this like whole AI situation, because like it's recreating like photorealism, and it's like that is something that can be trained to do. It's like coming up with these concepts and ideas and connections that the human mind can do and communicate. That's what makes us special as illustrators. It's not like how good you can paint a horse.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's always been my take on things too. For all the amazing ability that people have with being able to draw from life, and that is a skill, and it's beautiful. And there's a reason why people want to be able to draw. There's something so satisfying about that skill. It's like being able to sing in tune. Like it's something that when you can do it, it's satisfying. But yeah, what is the point of illustration today when we have photography and television and now AI that can kind of make things realistic, except for hands, and so it's funny that we're having this conversation today. Like I said, I've been doing some research in looking into the history of editorial illustration, and following that path, illustration had its heyday, say in the 1940s with Norman Rockwell, where it was very narrative and realistic. And then in the 50s and 60s, the photography started just taking over in magazines, and in various movements. I'm getting a little bit teachery here, but basically there were like the modernist movement, then there was like the hippie stuff in the 60s. And so there's a big shift where illustrators were being invited to actually be a lot more personal and interpretive and innovative in their work. And they weren't competing with photography. They were now like being a lot more like artists and very personal in their work. And so a lot of magazines built their identities around the kind of illustrations that people were making. And that's why the New York Times has that reputation, and the New Yorker and Time Magazine and Fortune, GQ, Esquire, like they all sort of spearheaded that illustrator as artist model rather than illustrator as documenter or recapitulator of reality. And so, you have television that threatened all that whole stuff, and now we have AI. So we're still having this conversation, but at the end of the day, the value of an illustrator or an artist is really in a perspective and a way of, like we're talking about the ability to like paint realistically, that kind of thing. Like it's about almost like by not having those things, you have to kind of cobble something together that's more interpretive or something like that. And I don't know. Is that at all?
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, I think the idea that illustration originally served a one of its biggest purposes was because there wasn't like easy access to color photography, and it was easier to just like draw everything. And then when that became more of a thing, illustration sort of got pushed away until people realized that like the value of illustration is not perfectly recreating something that you could do with a photo, because we can do that with photos. It's more about like streamlining things to just focus on the message and like to communicate this thing, or like stylize or do something that you couldn't do with a real image.
That's
or
right.
like a real photo. It's like something new. And that's why the idea of photorealism, it's just like, look how good I can reproduce this thing. And that is, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to not be, but I don't know. I don't think it's that important for illustration at all.
Yeah, it's important for some kinds of illustration, and there are some kinds where it doesn't matter very much at all. Obviously your work is very graphic. It's very typographic. I would describe it as busy, Nickelodeon-y, monstery, stickery, lettering based, kind of more in the Ren and Stimpy, SpongeBob SquarePants world, versus something more like Anita Kunz, who's very like painterly and realistic and stuff like that. And do you ever feel like, even though you know who you are as a creative, you know what you do, you have an established style, your clients come to you for what you do and they appreciate that, do you ever feel a little bit like you wish you could go deeper?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always have like imposter syndrome in that regard, or sometimes I'm, my partner's probably heard me say this a million times, where I'm just like, oh, I can't draw at all. I'm like terrible at this. I wish I could just draw. I feel like I should be better at this point. Or like if I'm like struggling with something, or like, I don't know, just like little things. And I think it's just a struggle that sort of everyone has, but I don't ever feel like I wish I could do stuff more realistic, because like I did it in art school. It's just not interesting to me, and it's also not what people want from me when they hire me, and it's also not, I don't think it's fun at all. I like to really play with expressions and like infuse humor into my work, and that's hard to do when you're just like rendering a nostril.
The nostril, such a hard detail to perfect.
It's funny. I almost, like I mentioned when I was a kid, I was like dead set on doing design and like art and like that being a thing. And I almost like gave up on it completely in art school, in high school, because we were like doing a still life of a like fruit drawing. And my apple was bad. It was fine. It just wasn't like, I looked over and two of my classmates had better apples than me. And I'm like, well, if I can't compete in my class, I'm never going to make it. And luckily my teacher at the time was like, there's way more to this than being able to copy something. That's something that you can practice and learn. And she's like, your work, it has a sense of humor and like has all this stuff going on, and you should definitely not give up on this. And very, very, very thankful for it, because I was like, oh, what else will I do? Maybe I'll be a social worker or something. I don't know why I thought that, but I guess psychology was like the only class that was interesting to me.
What was your teacher's name?
At the time it was Mrs. Oberg, but I guess she got married and then she's not working there anymore, and I have no idea who she is or where she is now. I've tried to find out a couple times to say thank you, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, shout out to Mrs. Oberg for, I don't think high school art teachers are known for their, this is a very unfair generalization, but I guess my instinct or my impression is just that you get a lot of stupid criticism about art in high school classes, even in some art programs in university, where it's like you just killed that creative soul, and now whatever potential they had is suffering. And I think it's really important whatever Mrs. Oberg said to you there, and said it's not about drawing bad apples or good apples. There's more to it. So I think that's great. I actually failed my senior year in high school art.
Oh no.
I couldn't keep up with the history. I was just like, we didn't do any of that. It's just being ADHD, like if you're not interested in something, it's just, you're not going to do it. And
oh my God. Yeah.
There was no way I was going to remember the names of artists. I didn't know why I was doing it. And it was later that I was like, yeah.
In art school, I remember it being like pushed that like, because you had to take these art history classes for your major. And then it was like, if you take like 3 more, you could be an art history minor. And I remember that being enticing at the time. And now that I'm like thinking about it, I'm like, why on earth did that even matter to me? Like, a minor is nothing. Like, it doesn't mean anything. There's no point. Like, no one has ever asked anything about my degrees and my work. And like, that kind of, as someone with ADHD, that kind of stuff, like those like tests where you have to remember all these little things, dates and stuff like that, is impossible. And it was such a struggle and so much stress that was pointless. Like, I think it would have been great to like see all that stuff. Like if I took them like as like a pass fail thing, you know what I mean? Like to learn about it and not take the test. Which I remember when I used to teach classes as an adjunct. Still teach one thing, but that's a different topic. But anyway, I was teaching seniors, and the best ones in my class, like most cases, were dual majors, design and illustration. And they were so stressed out. And I'm like, why are you doing this to yourself? Like, I think like if you choose the one that is like most important to you, and then take the other classes, but like don't like take them as like a pass fail or whatever, like so you can learn. But like, what are you doing this for? So you can get into college? Like, you're already here. Like, none of this matters. And like none of them ever listened to me. Like, all stuck with it. And I'm like, why on earth are you doing this? You know what I mean? Like, there's no point. Like, the knowledge, yes, I don't want to say that you shouldn't take those classes. I think that is great. But like, don't make your other work suffer because of it. Like, take the class so you can learn, but not worry about the grade. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. I have this sense. I can't speak to your particular students or anyone taking double majors or major minor situations, but there is this sense of being productive and having a purpose when you're within academia. And I wanted to do my master's degree. That was my sense of where I was headed when I was in art school. And I thought that I would become a full-on teacher in the university setting. And so I was master's degree bound. But I just got the sense that a lot of the people in master's degrees were actually just, they hadn't left the academic nest. They weren't ready to do it. They weren't finding work or whatever reason. I found that a lot. It's a sort of procrastination from just getting out there and being a full-fledged professional, whatever that means, like being out in the world. And I have to admit, like this is a shadow that I have to maybe work on or something like that. But I do instinctually feel like that is sort of what a lot of people in that setting are doing. I could be totally wrong, and I'm probably alienating people right now by saying this, but I just found that once I was working in the real world, that was my education. I was doing stuff and learning from it and getting paid. And anytime that I've been tempted to go back into getting my master's degree, which does happen from time to time because I'm interested in that stuff, it's usually when I start doubting myself and my ability to keep going, just as what I'm doing now. And
I sort of did that.
Yeah.
Like I went and got my master's degree out of like imposter syndrome.
Okay. Did I just completely, are you, tell me about that.
No, there was some like, so I was at the time teaching as an adjunct, and the program was actually at the Harvard Art School, but it's a low residency program where you just meet for a week in the fall, a week in the spring, and then 2 weeks in the summer, so you can keep working. And because I was an adjunct there, I got discount, so there was that. And I just had this like, this was, I don't know, 5 years into being a professional illustrator. And like at the time, like I literally paid for grad school with like advertising illustration money from a McDonald's project. Like, so like wow. I paid for it out of pocket with work I was doing for McDonald's, but still felt like I wasn't a real illustrator because I hadn't taken any illustration classes. And also the idea that I was like making a living as an illustrator, if like it still feels too good to be true. But even then, 5 years in, it was like, you know, this, I need to have a backup plan. And I was like, well, if I have my master's, maybe I could teach full time. I don't know. It just felt like something to do. But it, you know, it was a lot of money for what?
So you actually have a master's?
I do have a master's in illustration.
You do, and I just completely insulted you.
No. I agree with everything you said. I did meet my partner in the program, so that is great. But like in terms of my career or my skill set, the most valuable thing I got out of the program was like the friends that I made there. But like
seriously,
yeah, it's, you know, it's was a big expense for some friends.
I hope you still are friends with some of those people.
Yeah, I mean, they're great, but you know, it's it was not in any way necessary for my career.
Right. I'm sure that it's really what you put into it and what you want to get out of something like that. Even my undergrad, I would say there are huge components of that experience that could have been way better. And either for the quality of the teacher or the organization of the actual program, like how things were actually set up, how relevant it was for the times. I was there to roll up my sleeves and work and become the best gosh darn designer that I could be. Like I was so gung-ho. Mm-hmm. And I got a lot out of that experience, but it was in the friends that I made, the connections I made, and I actually left. I graduated school very bitter about my actual education, what I got. I probably didn't pay nearly as much as you would have paid for a master's degree in the US, but it was definitely I was so disillusioned with how things were done in the academic world. And so I kind of, that bad taste in my mouth probably sticks with me today, which is why I have this perspective. But I also really think that like I still recommend people, if they can afford it, go to art school, because there's nowhere else that you're going to have a concentrated, dedicated period of your life, 3 or 4 years of focusing on what you want to do. You might have great teachers. You might have teachers who should not be teaching. But if you're there to learn, you're gonna grow. You're gonna get stuff out of it. And so I think it's the same with a master's degree. You're gonna get what you put into it. And of course, if your goal is to be within a teaching position, then you need that terminal degree. You got to get it. That's just part of it. But I really agree. There's been zero clients ever that asked me my credentials. They saw my work and wanted me to do that for them.
Yeah, it's hard for me to recommend art school, but like what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And for some people, it's needed. Like I think the community aspect is really important, but it's so expensive. And I was in rough shape after undergrad. I graduated with over $80,000 in debt just from undergrad, and like that was a long time ago. It's like worse now, and like it's not worth that. I think you should be very mindful of those costs. It's so hard to at least for me, it was so hard to understand that amount of money and just like the idea of paying for it when you're that age. Like for me, it was like, okay, I'm just signing this student loan thing. I guess everyone does this. And like, it just was like the idea of $80,000 was not, it was just like so foreign to me. Like, I'm sure there are people who have a much better grasp on that. But like, as someone who grew up in a family that like didn't have any money, like it just was like, oh, well, I guess this is what money is. And I'll get a job. And that's just what people do. And like, I didn't know anything about it. So I think it's a lot. And it is not required at all.
It's not required, but I do think that as expensive as education is, especially in the US, there is a bit of a culturalization that happens to you while you're going through that sausage factory. Like you're being exposed to ideas and critical thinking, whether you buy into it all or not. You're learning like a lot of theoretical stuff that becomes kind of, you could speak a language. So you're speaking with your art director. Maybe you have an assignment from the New York Times, which I've never had, but their articles are often erudite, and there's a sort of tone to it that it behooves you as an illustrator to understand. And
yeah, I agree, definitely. But you can, if you're someone who's self-motivated, can get that elsewhere.
True.
I think it's much harder, and you have to be, and I don't know if that's possible. Like it's hard for me to understand. Like if I think about myself back then, no, I probably wouldn't have had the ability to do that. But now, like with, Skillshare and, the stuff is out there. But I agree, best case scenario, art school. It's just hard to justify the cost in many situations. But there are great programs that you can find in public schools. Like I know here in Connecticut, UConn has a really good program. And if you are, that's where you live, that would be much more affordable than like a private art school like I went to. So I just think you should be mindful of that decision, even if it seems abstract.
So there's a place, what did you call it? UConn?
Yeah, University of Connecticut.
Okay. Not the province or territory north of British Columbia.
Oh, no.
Canada.
It's, yeah, I guess that's, the vernacular is very common here because I'm in Connecticut. But yeah, it's University of Connecticut. Yeah. But that's just an example because like I'm familiar with that school. But there's, all over the country there. You just, visit these schools if you're, I don't know why we're just like talking to high school students who are listening to podcasts right now. But just, oftentimes the more expensive school is not the best school.
I definitely see how that can be true. And like, I fully agree that there's no reason why you can't cobble together your own education today, where it comes to, you could read books, you can watch videos. There's so many ways you can learn. Anything that I've learned in the last almost 20 years since graduating, has it been that long? It's been a long time. Not that long, but maybe 15 years.
It's not fun to think about.
What's that?
That's not fun to think about.
No, you don't like getting old?
No.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that a lot of everything, I've become a much more well-rounded person just by being so-called self-educated since then.
Yeah.
But I just remember, like, I was part of a community. This is kind of what led me to want to get a degree and go to art school in the first place. I was part of this. I mean, this is like trivia, but I went to a church in downtown Toronto. I lived down there, and there was it was just for me, like, I'm in my early 20s. At this church, it was kind of like this artsy community. Everyone was just like making beautiful music. Everyone dressed beautifully. There were so many like professional artists and designers and people doing stuff that was like, I never knew people who were doing these kinds of things. And at the time I was going to college for computer engineering technology, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, I suddenly realized like I have this this creative side to me that I somehow just put under the carpet because I didn't think it was a professional thing to do. And so suddenly one thing that I noticed was a lot of people were in the city to go to U of T or to OCAD or Ryerson, like all these universities getting degrees, a lot of them taking art stuff. And so I suddenly felt like an outsider, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to get my degree in art and then I'll be like so there's a little bit of like that imposter syndrome that makes you feel like you want to fit in. So you go and do the thing. And I'm glad that I got my degree. I'm proud of the fact that I did that and I made that move. For me, it was a symbolic move of confidence in myself. Like, I want to be a graphic designer. I know I have the talent. I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to leave the city where I'm from and go and do this thing. And that was a good decision, a very good decision. But today, I wonder if it's the same thing, where unless you have kind of been inducted into this club of educated people, and you have the not just the paper. The paper is a symbol. It's like a certificate of you did the thing. But you have that experience. You've had access to professors who come from this line of educated people themselves. You have cohorts, like you're part of a class. You have all the shop talk that you have with your fellow students along the way, all the grunting and grumbling about the assignments and late nights, overnighters and stuff like that. There's something that only being in university, college, or that kind of thing can do. Like, if you're learning on your own, it's just like what people do all day, every day now, especially since the pandemic. It's like we're at home doing stuff remotely and we're alone.
Yeah. I mean, like when you talk about that stuff and I think about my time in art school, I agree. It was great. And, I miss that stuff, but I don't know. It's a struggle too. It's just, I think the problem is not that, I don't know. I think it's more of the system of the university. I don't know how different it is in Canada, but like it's a broken system, and that needs to be fixed so that people can experience this without being saddled with just incredible debt because they just wanted to learn how to become what they want to do. Yeah.
It is a huge problem. I mean, just being your neighbor to the north, I see that. But I mean, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. This is probably a whole other conversation, but I think we all understand that it doesn't make sense for education to be so inaccessible when it's like the backbone of what makes a country possible.
And it's like getting, one of the reasons why it's getting worse is because, a lot of people can't afford it, And then like, so numbers are going down, and then the bar to get in is lowered. Like when I applied to art school, like I got in with like my grades and stuff like that, but you had to have a separate thing for the art school, and I had to like submit a portfolio, and they made me come back because I didn't have enough life drawing in there. Now they don't even look at portfolios because they need the numbers.
Yes.
So like,
yes,
it gets more and more expensive, and then the quality is going down as it's getting more expensive.
Yeah, that was actually something I noticed even when I was in art school, was that there were people I could see, like, I'm like, why are they here? They can't even lift up a pencil. And I know that's judgy, but when you worked hard to make your entrance portfolio, and it meant like life or death for you to get into art school, and then you see people who are just there on a ticket. Someone said, like, got them there, but they're not really there in their mind. That's frustrating. It takes down the whole quality of the experience. But I could already see that the university was hungry and needed those people there. A lot of these were international students, and they pay like, more about what an American would pay for college or more. So there is a sense of like, oh, I see how it works. I see how the system works. And then the disillusionment starts. You think that it's this bastion of like academic purity and education, and we only care about ideas, and no, it all comes down to money. But I think there's a strong case for, in spite of all the benefits of education and being part of a thing, there's if you can make good work and demonstrate that and get your first clients going, get that ball rolling, you will never need to step foot in a university.
And I feel like that's kind of like, even though I did go to art school and that kind of thing, like my illustration career started pretty separate from that, because it was like me just making drawings and like sharing them online and like doing, and like it was very separate from my design career. Like the work, like how I built my illustration career. Like I say, I did it accidentally because like it was just me like making illustrations and sharing them and doing it like for a while, and after a year starting to get commissions based on those. And it wasn't like, it felt like totally separated from my art school experience. Obviously, it all ties together and it comes from that. And like, I learned things in art school about drawing, like, I still had foundations but it was still just very, I don't know what I'm getting at. I'm rambling about, I think you were saying that like, I think you were saying that you can, like, it's not required to be an illustrator. And I guess my point is like, yes, I went to art school for design, but then my illustration career felt like it was very disjointed from that experience. Yeah.
You know what, I have a proposition now for people out there. And I think this is maybe a way, an alternative to, going through the expensive education route, is that, so the common thread between you and me and almost every illustrator that I'm familiar with and know today is that so much of our early success came from a daily project of some kind. And that happened because we initiated it. It wasn't something we had to do for work or for school or any other thing. And I think that the important thing is that you're doing something. So you probably have a job of some kind, doesn't matter what it is. So you have a job, you're able to support yourself, and you have almost like it gives you a structure, or you're connected in that way to people and things and ideas. And then you're having experiences, whether it's going for walks in the city every day or you're living abroad. You're doing something that is exposing you to stuff, new ideas, newness. And then meanwhile, you have a creative project that you're working on and sharing with whatever the sharing things are of your day. Back in when we started for you, I'm sure it was blogs, Tumblr
Flickr
type stuff, Flickr, yeah, totally. My Flickr's still up, and it has all my old daily drawings that I did. Yeah. I'm gonna have to take a look at that after. But it's like that's where you start to build up friends, fans, followers, and your first sense of like someone notices it, reaches out to you, like, oh, I love that drawing of the SpongeBob that you did. Would you make a sticker for my blah, blah, blah? Something small, or it could be something big. My first commission, illustration commission, after I graduated, I've been doing daily drawings, was for a University of Toronto project. It was like, okay, now I'm doing this. And so what do you think about that? So it's like, it doesn't matter about your education. It's like the assumption is there's some skill and interestingness involved in your work. That's a whole other thing, but you're using it every day to work something out. And that's what gets you. That's the important thing.
Yeah, I think it's more so than just like getting started and building your career. I think it's crucial for like maintaining longevity. One of the things I remember from grad school was there was all these like older illustrators that were like guest speakers that had been around forever, and there were a lot of them who were very bitter about illustration. And what I was realizing, it was because they had like a successful career for a short span of time doing the same sort of thing all the time, and then it sort of ended. Is because they were just like, when you're an illustrator, you get hired based on stuff that you've made and put out there. People see it, they're like, we like this thing that you did, we'd like you to do something like that for us. And if you aren't making personal work and new work and experimenting and exploring, and not necessarily like trying to change your style, but the act of making work helps you naturally evolve in an organic manner. But if you don't do that, you're just going to keep getting hired for the same thing and just recycling that concept until nobody cares anymore. You're sick of it. Everyone else is sick of it. And you claim that the illustration industry is dead, but it's really just because you have not grown or evolved at all.
I thought you were going to say it's because you died inside.
That too.
That would have been more poetic. Yeah. So, man, education and vector art have been our themes today. I don't want to take too much of your time, too much more of your time. I could talk with you forever.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. I want to try and make sure that there's some light at the end of this tunnel, I guess. I think hopefully it's clear that for all the things that I might have said about the importance or the benefits of education, that it's clear that there are and should be other alternatives to it. Like there are other paths into it. And I mean, that's a huge swath of my audience on Skillshare or any of these things. The reason people listen to this kind of stuff, like a podcast about illustration or a YouTube channel from an illustrator, is because people are hungry to learn and they're not in art school. And so I think that's the takeaway, is what we've kind of just ended on here, is that ability to work something out and consistently work at it every day and be growing and evolving. And that's not something that's limited to beginners. It's something that us old guys need to be doing too. And when you talked about these old school dudes or illustrators, whoever they were, not just dudes,
It was dudes.
It was just dudes.
It's always dudes complaining.
So these guys were sort of finding the industry leaving them behind.
Yeah, well, no, they didn't see it that way. They saw it as illustration being dead. Like, I remember being like, just crawling out of my skin, hearing them telling these students that the illustration industry was like dead and, you know, there's no more opportunities. And I was like, I'm paying for grad school with illustration money. There's so many opportunities. I would say that there's more opportunities now than there's ever been before. Like, even if you just consider the idea of like the social media advertising where there's just like so much more creative freedom and so much more projects and like big budgets because it's advertising. But like, I don't know, like social media advertising is like a renaissance for illustrators right now because these brands need all of this content. Yeah. And it's not content that needs to appeal. It's like, you know, it's not like a TV commercial that has to appeal to like a 13-year-old kid and like an 80-year-old woman. Like, it's like they're targeting specific niches. So it's like there's so much more creative freedom. And but you know, even editorial, sure, things have slowed, but like, you know, there's all these online sources too who are still hiring illustrators to make content. Like, they're, you know, BuzzFeed has in-house illustrators on staff. It's just the illustration industry isn't dead because nobody wants your weird caricatures in pencil that you have to mail them for them to scan because you won't touch a computer.
Yeah, okay. So I stand corrected. These guys were not saying they were being left behind, but they are the last standing true illustrators, and illustration's dead.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think it's one and the same. It's this feeling of like victimhood in a way. It's not quite the right word, but I think I'm seeing that happen to me now as a 40-something illustrator who's enjoyed a lot of success, and things are changing so rapidly, and I'm resisting. I'm getting dragged into things kicking and screaming. In many cases, you know, we're all afraid of the robots and stuff like that. And I love how this is going to come full circle to what we were talking about in the beginning, which is the importance of personal perspective and interpretation and like what you think about something and how that comes through in your illustration versus just painting a dog with every hair rendered perfectly. And I'm not disparaging that beautiful, amazing skill that I cannot do. It's just that is.
I wonder what that instinct is, because like I feel it too, but like, you know what? I'll say it. I don't care. Like, you spent a lot of time doing that, but like my phone has portrait mode. I could take a sweet picture of my dog. Unless you are making that dog look like it has something that doesn't exist. But I can do that in Photoshop, so I'm disparaging. I'll be the negative Nancy here.
Okay, I'll let this show end on you being an asshole and me. You're not being an asshole. That's maybe the first time I've used a cuss word on my.
I'm a bad influence.
We're getting spicy here. You know what? I do know that if you go onto TikTok, or I'm actually never on TikTok. I probably just said that to sound with it. But if you go onto Instagram, on which I am truly active, into Reels, you will find that if there's someone doing a process like a time lapse of drawing like an eye, perfectly rendered eye, or whatever it is, that stuff, people love that stuff. People love to watch.
There's a difference between views on Instagram and getting paid to make something.
Right, but you were talking just about like, what is it? What's the point of?
Is the point just to get views on social media?
That might be it, but what's the point of people watching that and enjoying it? So,
Well, sure, but that's different than illustration, right?
Yeah.
That's like content for entertainment, whereas, as illustrators, we have to, we're, getting hired to do something like that. What is that? What is the point of that eye besides being a beautiful piece of art? But that's art. It's not illustration.
Yeah. It is a good question. Like, what role does realism have in today's illustration landscape?
And I also think, like, if you really enjoy that like act of like perfectly recreating something and like making it look as real as possible, if that's what you enjoy doing, then like go for it. I'm just saying, I don't know if it's purpose in illustration.
Yeah. No, I'm very much in that same world, and my whole development and the people that I kind of came up under or have been most influenced by have always been more toward where we sort of are in that. This is a new word that I love, autographic, like an autographic way of illustrating, which is like it's more personality based.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap this up, I am curious you have a growing following. A lot of people look up to you and look to you for your advice as an illustrator, and I guess as a multi-hyphenated person on the internet. What advice do you have for people who want to get into illustration? What would you tell them if they want to get into illustration today?
I mean, honestly, I owe every aspect of my career to my daily drawing project. And as you mentioned, so many people have that thing. And I'm not saying like the only way to be an illustrator is like you have to do a daily drawing project. But like for someone like me, that structure is crucial. And like you may not be someone who needs a structure of like a daily drawing project. But I think the key takeaway is to make lots and lots of work. And if that feels terrible to you, then you probably shouldn't be an illustrator. If that seems like, I'm so excited to make stuff, then I think you have a great chance of being an illustrator. I think the most important thing to ask yourself if you want to be an illustrator is like, would I be doing this if I wasn't getting paid? And if you didn't say yes, then I think you can absolutely be an illustrator. But if you're someone who like wouldn't be drawing or like, is just not really interested unless you're getting paid for it, then do something else. It'll be a lot easier for you.
Well said. Unless you're willing to do a lot of work and illustrate on your own initiative, it's going to be hard to imagine doing that for a living.
Yeah, so. And I mean, like, if it's not something that you think is really like, I love drawing. I'm always drawing. That's so like, so it doesn't feel like work to me. But if it feels like work to you, yeah, there's easier ways to make money.
Okay, well, I gotta say, I love drawing, I love illustration, but it always feels like work for me. But
well, it's sure, like that. Some stuff feels like work, but in comparison to like, like I can't think of anything I'd want to do more than this.
No, I'm in that boat too. Anytime I'm having a hard time, I'm like, there are no other options for me.
Yeah, just think about all the jobs I've had growing up. Like, all of those sound 1,000 times worse than my worst day as an illustrator.
Amen to that. Is there anything you want to hype or promote that you're excited about this time?
I mean, not really, aside from, I guess YouTube is like a big thing for me now, which if you asked me 2 years ago if I'd have a YouTube channel, I would have said absolutely not. And here I am. I post new videos every Tuesday, and I do live streams every Friday, unless something comes up, which is rare, but it did come up last weekend. yeah, so check out my YouTube channel.
Check out Chris's YouTube channel, Chris Piascik.
Nailed it.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
I'm always worried I'm going to say it wrong.
Everyone says it wrong though, so I'm used to it. Yeah.
Look it up. Just look up Illustrator vector expert.
Realism hater.
Realism hater. So okay, yeah, definitely check out Chris's YouTube's. I love your YouTube channel.
Thank you.
I love your presence. I love your calm demeanor. Your clippage. I don't know the way you just. I don't know. I think you're a natural, and you're a refreshing face and voice in a world of slick YouTube stuff. Like I think you have an amazing channel. So
well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
There's no when I saw you starting, I was like, okay, you've got the consistency. You're doing it like you said, the 2 days, like at least once a week, and then you're actually like talking to people. You're engaging, and it's no surprise to me that you're doing so well, and you're gonna keep busting. So,
well, I appreciate
good
that.
Work.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
All right, everybody. That was Chris Piascik, and I'm Mr. Tom Froese, and those were our thoughts on illustration. Be sure to check out Chris Piasik's YouTube channel. I recommend his video, The Best Adobe Fresco Class, featuring past Thoughts on Illustration guest Kyle T. Webster. Links are in the description. Of course, you can find links to all my things at tomfroese.com, including my work, Skillshare classes, and more. Remember to rate, review, like, follow, tell your friends, and all those lovely things. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next one. The music for this podcast was written and performed by Mark Allen Falk. You can find links to all his music in the show notes, or go directly to his Linktree at linktree/semiathletic.